So I gotta suck up, 'cause you ain't gonna let up. And you never gonna let up. Never gonna fall.
Here's your host, Kevin Warren.
Mike Boynton grew up in Brooklyn, New York, playing basketball at a very early age after following his dad around the parks of New York City. Life took a very hard turn early with the loss of his only brother, but found enough success to rise up in the college assistant coaching ranks to become the head coach at Oklahoma State University at age 35. Mike talks about the influences in his life that led him to his relationship with Christ. Born in 1982 in Brooklyn, I asked Mike to start there.
I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, the son of Michael Boynton Sr. and Millicent Boynton, two hardworking blue-collar folks who raised their children to really respect one another, to work hard, and to understand that education would be the foundation of all they wanted to achieve in life. I have 4 sisters, 3 older, 1 younger. And I joke with people all the time that I got into sports because I couldn't get into the bathroom at home. And so as a young boy growing up with 4 sisters, it was a challenge being around 4 sisters and my mom often. My dad worked as a runner and a broker at the New York Stock Exchange for a company called Charles Schwab. And my mom was primarily a home keeper, but also spent some time working in retail at some sporting goods stores in Brooklyn. And so mom was home almost every day and made sure when we got home from school, the first thing we did was do our homework, which I'm raising young kids now, and they don't always have homework, which sometimes still confuses me. And then before we can go outside and play with our friends or do anything extracurricular, we had to take care of our academic responsibilities. So that was the start of my life. And sports has always been a big part of that. Baseball was my favorite sport growing up as a kid. Still is a sport I hold dear to my heart. But basketball caught my attention quite early as I would travel around with my dad and watch him play in different parks and at different rec leagues around New York City. A lot of times with his coworkers after work or on the weekends. And then I think I was about 6 or 7 years old when I first got introduced to organized basketball with a team of my own. And that was through a program called the Police Athletic League in New York City. And then subsequently got to play in some other youth leagues and really became really in love with the game of basketball. Have been a part of basketball teams every year of my life since then.
Mike, any of your sisters gravitate toward sports at all?
No. In fact, none of my sisters played any sports of any degree and didn't even really come support me when I was playing that much when I was younger. But it's interesting enough, they all have children of their own, and they all have children that are into sports themselves, so they've become sports parents, even though they weren't into sports when they were growing up.
Mike, as we go through talking about, growing up and becoming an adult and where you are now, you've had tragedies in your life, but man, you were introduced to tragedy at a very early age. I was reading one account when you were 5 years old and your mom was pregnant and mom and dad go to the hospital. You're expecting a little brother to come back with them. Talk about that experience.
Yes, probably one of the more, as I think about it now, one of the more defining moments of my life. And at 5 years old, you don't know that, and it doesn't even make sense that someone would say something could be life-defining at 5 years old. But yeah, that was a difficult moment for our family. My mom and dad, like we said, was 3 girls already, and myself as a boy. And they were, I think they've never said this because I don't know if they wanted my little sister to feel bad, but I think they wanted another boy, and they got pregnant and was due to have a boy. Picked out a name and done the nursery thing, and we had all kind of plans for a boy to come into the world in 1987. My mom goes into labor and has some complications during labor, and respiratory issues. And my little brother was born and subsequently died in the hospital during that time. And so, when my mom leaves, I'm thinking that, I'm going to have a little brother, and I can't wait to, play with him and wrestle with him and have him and Dad and I go to places and do things together. And and when he doesn't come home, it's kind of confusing at first, because how does the baby not come home from the hospital?
Mm-hmm.
But it was a difficult moment, and now I look back and I realize that it was something that that in some way has helped me, because it taught me a valuable lesson on the value of life, and on the meaning of relationship. And it's why so much of my life has been based on having genuine relationship with people who I come into contact with, because I know how easily or how unfortunate things can turn out in a negative way, and that life can be, stricken from or derailed, or whatever the word is that you want to use. But I still think about my little brother to this day, although I never got a chance to see him or meet him. I still have in my mind what I thought he would look like, what I thought he would be like, and I still have thoughts in my mind about the things that we would have been able to do together. And I'm 41 now, so he would have been in his 36 or so, and I still think about if our kids would be friends and our wives would be friends, and all the things that you think about in life. And so, no question that was a critical time, and certainly still a big loss.
In those times when you dream, Mike, did you always beat him one-on-one, or did he beat you?
You know what? I really have this has always been the way I envisioned it. He never beat me, but he was better than I. Like he became the NBA star or the NFL star, and I was never quite good enough to get there, but he would come home and I'd kick his butt at the family reunion all the time,
Listen, Mike, I appreciate that, because that obviously is a very sad story, but that's a really cool way to think about what could have been. So you grow up, you're playing a lot of basketball. You're good enough, obviously, to play college basketball. You chose South Carolina. Why South Carolina? What were some of the other choices that you had?
Yeah, so it's I was an above-average basketball player as a young kid, maybe really good, even if someone would describe me at that point. And so I was good enough to be recruited, because growing up in New York City at the time, it was a big deal. I was the most valuable player of the Catholic school basketball league, which is kind of the top tier basketball league for high school kids in that city. And during my junior years, when I really started to get recruited, and I was recruited by Hofstra and Seton Hall and St. John's, and obviously South Carolina, where I ultimately ended up going. But my senior year, I took 3 official visits. I took one to South Carolina. It was my first one. I took a visit to Boston College, and I took a visit to UMass, University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and ultimately chose South Carolina in large part because of the relationship and the honesty I felt that Eddie Fogler, who was the coach at the time, had recruited me with. He was very transparent about the opportunity. He was very serious about challenging me on the court, but also academically, and really wanting to pour into my development as a person. He never told me that he would retire after my freshman year in college, though. So that was the curveball I got thrown just a few months later.
Now, did you end up playing all 4 years then at South Carolina?
I did. I started in August of 2000 and had varying degrees of success and experienced some failures there, no question. But after Coach Fogler retired, at the end of my freshman year, I did contemplate whether I should leave. And I'm kind of thankful that the rules aren't as lax as they are now, because I don't know if I would have been strong enough to think that it would be best for me to stay. Because without having to sit, back then you had to sit out and, start over and, find another situation and go through the recruiting process again. So I just kind of found my way, and Coach Dave Odom, who came in from Wake Forest, really helped me grow as a man. And it was probably the best thing that happened to me, was not having the opportunity to leave South Carolina after my freshman year without having to sit out. And so I stayed there for 4 years, got my degree in 3.5, was able to start on a master's, I was able to develop tremendous relationships, and now still feel like I'm connected to the school. It's one of the things that, not to get off topic, but in this age of the transfer portal, you got guys who played at 3 or 4 schools sometimes, and where do they go for their Letterman's reunion? Like, where do they go for alumni, stuff? Who do they connect with? I feel sad that a lot of these kids are missing out on those valuable things.
They don't think about that is probably what's going on. That the repercussions will come later, but they're just all about what is good for me now. I want to ask you too, Mike. Where did you get the faith that you have now? Was it developed in the home, or did it start to develop in college? Where did becoming a Christian really become important for Mike Boynton?
Yeah, that's an unbelievable question, and I'm my grandmother, Fannie Mae Boynton, who still resides in Swainsboro, Georgia, a small town in East Georgia, was a extremely faithful and faith-based person. She's my dad's mom. And she tried as hard as she could to force me into the church when I was a kid. And I tried as hard as I could to get as far away from her as possible. I just didn't think it was important, and I didn't understand the value. And quite honestly, she went to a Baptist church in Brooklyn where we grew up. And we would go there on the weekends, and sometimes I thought, I want to do anything I can to get out of this place before we're here for 3.5 hours. But that's what my experience was with church, other than my grandmother wanting to pray for every and anything and everyone she could possibly ever think of. And so she planted the seed in my heart and in my mind. And even though I resisted it for a long time, there just continued to be things that happened in my life that I knew wasn't pure coincidence. There's just not that much coincidence in the world. And ultimately, what the seed she planted was nurtured and really, really manifested itself when I was in college. I met a guy named Chris Levy-Johnson, who I consider one of my best friends in the world now. He's a pastor at a church called Brooklyn Baptist Northeast in Columbia, South Carolina. But he actually was a professor at the University of South Carolina when I was a freshman. And one of my first classes on that campus was taught by him. And I took a liking to him, and we developed a great relationship. And he kept pouring into me and ultimately became the person who baptized me as an adult. Because I do believe that there's a difference when you make that choice yourself as opposed to getting baptized because your parents tell you you're going to get baptized on this Sunday at church service when you're a kid. He since has married my wife and I and has now baptized both of our children. And so it's just been a myriad of people in my life and circumstances and situations that have shown me that there are no coincidences. There's just faith, and faith drives every decision I make. They don't always feel good, but I'm always try to be conscious of the impact that has on my Lord and Savior and how he views my time here on earth.
I find it interesting because you mentioned Jenny, your wife, and South Carolina. And what's interesting is that when you were there as a player, that's not when you met, right? It was when you came back as a coach. That's when you connected with her, right?
Yeah. And again, like I said, coincidences. I'm back in Columbia around the pastor and the person who really kind of started to stir this back up that my grandmother had planted in me. And I meet this woman that I never intended on meeting myself. I had convinced myself, in all honesty, that I would maybe not get married, that it wasn't something that was that important. And again, I kept being shown this is the way. And so we met over breakfast one day, and it actually wasn't a breakfast that we intended on having together. It was a breakfast that she was overseeing, and I was just going to eat. And so I go over to the buffet to get some food. As I'm going through the line, and I pick up a couple pieces of bacon to put on my plate because I love bacon and still do. And I hear this voice across the other side of the buffet. And it says, "Is that enough?" It's the only thing I heard. And I'm thinking to myself, why would somebody be questioning how much bacon I'm eating here? And more to the point, who are you, person? You know? And so I look up and I see this beautiful woman standing across me, and she's like, yeah, I mean, portion control is important. I'm like, well, maybe for some people, but you don't know me. I don't need portion control. I'm not an athlete anymore. And we short talked there for a few minutes and then exchanged contact. I remember sending her an email telling her thanks for the advice on my nutrition, and then I offered to take her to lunch so she could continue to give me some education. But that was the start of our relationship, and some long talks and some courting, if you will, over the next couple of years. And in 2011, we were married and have 2 kids that are now 10 and 7 years old.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, and I noticed in Wikipedia there was one line that said that you have older children. Is that something that developed when you were in college at South Carolina?
That's true. I've got an older daughter named Samaya, who's now living in Atlanta, working at Emory Hospital. I have another daughter who's a sophomore at NYU. Samaya was born when I was in high school. And so, like I said, I resisted the Christian part of my life for quite some time until I was back in the graces of Jenny and Chris in Columbia. And so, absolutely, that's factual. My children mean the world to me. I still, do everything I can to support and encourage their development in life and their education. Beautiful girls. And I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful for Jenny for accepting all of us into her life when she did. And so it's been truly remarkable to see how God's worked to bring everything in my life together in such a way that it wouldn't be disruptive to anyone, even though it wasn't necessarily ideal in a way that most people would think.
Well, and I understand that, Mike, because I'm a stepfather. When I met my wife, my stepdaughter was 10, and so I welcomed her. I was grateful to be her stepfather. She still had a father, and who is still alive and active in her life, but I welcomed that into my life, and then I too have 2 other children with my wife as well. So I certainly understand the dynamic from Jenny's, point of view. I know when I became the program director of this network, I thought I was ready for something, and then when I got into it, it was like, oh my word, Lord, I need you now more than ever, because there's so much going on here that I didn't know about. Did you find yourself in a situation at first where you were overwhelmed maybe with everything, not only just to be a D1 head coach, Mike, but to be one at a school like Oklahoma State that has so much history behind it?
Absolutely. There's just so much more to the job than you ever imagined. I tell people this all the time. I was an assistant coach for 13 years before I became a head coach. And the further into the business I got, the more I thought that my head coaches acted like they were busy all the time. I thought, man, these guys always act like they got so much going on. Because I'm just focused on, what I have to do for the program, whether maybe I'm recruiting 2 or 3 guys, or maybe I have a third of the scouts, or maybe I've got to, whatever, or I got to work out with a couple of position guys or whatever, and never imagine that I think about, right, your perspective matters in a lot of parts of life, but never more importantly than when you are responsible for the entirety of an organization. And so now I realize, well, not only was like Brad Underwood, for example, who was my most recent head coach that I worked for, not only was I as an assistant coach bringing him names of people to call, well, so were the other 2 assistant coaches. So maybe if he didn't get to the 3rd or 4th kid that I asked him to call, it's because he called 2 guys from each of us that night. And then the AD asked him to call 2 big donors because we're trying to build this new facility, or his wife and children need some time at home, or whatever, or let alone his own personal time for himself. And so you don't think about those things. You just don't, because you don't understand it, because you've never been in that chair. And so there's no question there was a sense of overwhelmingness when you get the job, and every decision that has to be made ends at your desk for your signature, essentially, right?
Yep.
Are we going to play these games? Well, everybody may have their ideas, but it comes to your desk for final approval. How are we going to travel? Who's going to start? Who we're going to recruit? All those things go into the head coach's decision. Now, you have to have really good people around you to kind of decipher the information, but people still want to know ultimately where you stand on it before they move. And so, yes, it can be very overwhelming, the volume of the work that has to be done. Not necessarily the difficulty of it, but there's a lot that has to be done that needs your oversight or approval before it gets done. And so I think for probably the first 3 months, I just had my head down, and I don't know if I came up for air. But I also don't know how much we actually got done, just trying to sort through it all. But I'm thankful for the learning, the opportunity to learn on the job. The first thanks of that goes to Coach Holder, who took the chance on a 35-year-old who had never been a head coach before, and the Board of Regents, who entrusted this program that's got great tradition and a great following to a young man who needed to learn a lot, but also to our fans, not all of which who are completely on board immediately, but who rallied around us and have developed a great sense of support for myself and for the kids in the program.
Well, it's very difficult not to. You have such an infectious personality. Guys like me who are Christians, I love what you stand for and the fact that you are out there publicly wearing your Christianity on your sleeve. But that begs another question, because you talk about, all of the stuff that comes with basketball, which is so much. You've got a family, and then there are social issues. And I loved the letter that you posted in 2020, right after George Floyd's death, on Twitter. And I'm sure you remember the letter, but you had 4 distinct points that, as a black man, you were hoping that people would read and consider, moving forward as humans and how we treat each other. And number 1 on that list was to trust God fully. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, it's not easy. This world challenges you every day, and it puts you in position of whether you really want to believe. And why is because things don't go the way we want them to go. And I think that's the ultimate measure of our faith, is how faithful we are then, right? Not necessarily when we sign a number 1 recruit and he goes and becomes the number 1 pick in the draft, but on the day, 3 days before the season, when the NCAA calls and says your team's going to be banned from postseason this year. How faithful can you be then? How faithful can you be when you're on a 5-game losing streak versus just being on a 5-game winning streak, which our team did this past season? Mm-hmm. Those are the moments that really define, do you really believe, or are you fair weathered in your faith, and only when it goes well? And so that's why I always try to remind myself that even in the midst of difficult moments, God is good, and he's working on something here that's supposed to teach me a lesson. And that my responsibility in those moments is, as people are watching, because people watch you much more when things aren't going well, because that's the time they want to try to use to take advantage of. And so my job is to make sure I'm an example for the young men in our program about how to deal with adversity, how to respond to a difficult moment, how to respond to a bad call or some criticism or whatever it is, because those are really character-building moments. And I believe as you go through sport, it's just a microcosm of life. Losing a basketball game sometimes is like I did when I was 5 years old, losing a relative, losing a brother, and so learning how to manage yourself in those moments and really trust God that there's something to be learned here is invaluable. And I'm certainly thankful that, again, Fannie Mae Boynton really planted that seed, and she tried as hard as she could to nurture that thing when I was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and I resisted. And I'm really thankful for Chris Levy-Johnson for reinvigorating that and really seeing that thing grow through, and Jenny Boynton for being there with me every step of the way since we've been married going on 12 years now. That's
so awesome. Mike, thank you so much for your time, man. This is everything I hoped it would be. I know a lot of people who may not know a lot about your story after hearing this. are going to be fans of yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be.
So I gotta suck up, 'cause you ain't gonna let up.